In the heart of Africa, there was a small village called Umidike. The village was surrounded by tall palm trees and beautiful rivers where children played every day. The people of Umidike were kind and loved one another. The village was peaceful, and everyone was happy, but one day, something strange started happening. The girls in the village, who were known for their beauty and kindness, began to change. It all started with a girl named Amora. Amora was the daughter of the village chief, Chief Obina. She was loved by everyone because of her gentle nature and her willingness to help others. One afternoon, Amora went to fetch water from the river. But when she returned, she was different. Her mother, Mama Nkechi, noticed that Amora was no longer cheerful. She no longer helped around the house and seemed lost in her thoughts. Amora, my daughter, what is troubling you? Mama Nkechi asked. Amora just shook her head and said, Nothing, Mama. I'm fine. Days passed, and the other girls in the village started behaving like Amora. Ada, Neka, and even little Kemi, who was only 10 years old, all began to change. They no longer played with the other children, and they often wandered off into the forest by themselves. The boys in the village started to notice that the girls were becoming distant and didn't want to play with them anymore. Soon, the villagers began to whisper among themselves, wondering what was happening to their daughters. The village elders gathered to discuss the strange behavior of the girls. Chief Obina, who was very worried about his daughter Amora, said, This is not normal. Our girls are no longer the same. We must find out what is happening to them. The elders decided to visit the village priest, Baba Choku, who was known for his wisdom and knowledge of the spirits. Baba Choku lived in a small hut at the edge of the village, surrounded by ancient trees and sacred stones. When the elders arrived at Baba Choku's hut, they explained the situation to him. The wise priest listened carefully and then said, There is a dark force in our village. It has entered the hearts of our daughters and is turning them away from the path of goodness. But why, Baba? Why would this happen to our girls? Chief Obina asked with tears in his eyes. Baba Choku shook his head sadly. The spirits are angry. Something has disturbed the balance in our village, and until we find out what it is, our daughters will continue to change. The villagers were terrified. They didn't know what to do. Every day, the girls seemed to drift further away from their families. They no longer listened to their parents, and some even ran away from home to live in the forest. One day, a young hunter named Chidi, who was brave and clever, decided to follow the girls into the forest to find out what was going on. He took his bow and arrows and quietly followed Amora, Ada, Neka, and Kemi as they disappeared into the trees. As Chidi ventured deeper into the forest, he noticed that the girls were walking toward an old, abandoned shrine that had been forgotten by the villagers. The shrine was covered in thick vines, and the air around it felt cold and heavy. When the girls reached the shrine, they knelt down in front of it and began to chant strange words that Chidi had never heard before. Suddenly, a dark shadow emerged from the shrine and hovered above the girls. Chidi's heart raced as he realized that this was the dark force Baba Choku had warned about. The shadow was feeding on the girls' spirits, turning them away from the light and filling their hearts with darkness. Chidi knew he had to act quickly. He grabbed his bow and aimed an arrow at the shadow, hoping to scare it away. But before he could release the arrow, the shadow turned towards him, its eyes glowing red. Who dares to challenge me? The shadow hissed. Chidi felt a chill run down his spine, but he stood his ground. I will not let you take our girls, he shouted. The shadow laughed, a cold, eerie sound that echoed through the forest. Foolish boy, you cannot stop me. I am the spirit of darkness, and I will consume every girl in your village. Chidi knew he was no match for the spirit alone. He needed to get help, but he couldn't leave the girls behind. He quickly thought of a plan. He grabbed a handful of sacred leaves from his pouch, leaves that Baba Choku had given him for protection, and threw them at the shadow. The shadow screamed in pain as the leaves touched it, and for a moment, it weakened. Chidi took this chance to grab Amora's hand and pull her away from the shrine. Run, he shouted to the other girls. Run back to the village. But as they turned to flee, the shadow began to regain its strength, rising up to chase them. Chidi and the girls ran as fast as they could through the dense forest, with the shadow close behind them. The dark spirit moved swiftly, twisting through the trees like a snake. The air around them grew colder with each passing second, and the girls' breaths came out in short, fearful gasps. Amora, who was running beside Chidi, looked over her shoulder and saw the shadow getting closer. Chidi, it's catching up to us, she cried. Chidi knew they wouldn't make it back to the village in time. The shadow was too fast. He needed to find a way to slow it down or stop it altogether. His mind raced as he remembered something Baba Choku had once told him: darkness can only be defeated by light. Just then, Chidi spotted a clearing up ahead where the sunlight was breaking through the trees. He quickly led the girls toward it. This way. We need to get to the light. As they burst into the clearing, the sunlight hit them, warm and bright. The shadow hesitated at the edge of the trees, hissing in anger as the light touched its dark form. It couldn't enter the clearing where the sun shone. We are safe here, at least for now, Chidi said, trying to catch his breath. The girls huddled together, trembling. They had never been so frightened in their lives. Neka, the youngest among them, started to cry. Chidi, what are we going to do? We can't stay here forever. Chidi knew Neka was right. The sun would eventually set, and the darkness would return. They needed to figure out how to defeat the shadow before it was too late. Listen to me, Chidi said, looking at the girls. We have to get to Baba Choku. He's the only one who knows how to defeat the dark spirit. But we have to be smart and brave. Amora, who had always been the leader among the girls, nodded. We'll follow you, Chidi. Whatever you say, we'll do. Chidi thought for a moment. Okay, here's the plan. We'll wait until the shadow is weak, then we'll make a run for Baba Choku's hut. We have to stick together and not look back, no matter what happens. The girls agreed, though they were still scared. They knew that Chidi was their only hope. As they waited in the clearing, the sun slowly began to sink in the sky. The shadows grew longer, and the air became cooler. The dark spirit, sensing that the sun was setting, crept closer to the clearing, its red eyes glowing with anticipation. Now! Chidi shouted. Run as fast as you can. The group dashed out of the clearing, heading towards Baba Choku's hut. The shadow let out a furious roar and chased after them, but it was weaker now, struggling to keep up. The village was still some distance away, and Chidi knew they had to stay ahead of the spirit. As they ran, Chidi remembered the sacred leaves he had used earlier. He reached into his pouch and found a few more. He quickly handed them to the girls. Hold on to this. They'll protect you, he said. The girls clutched the leaves tightly, their hands trembling. The sacred leaves glowed faintly, creating a barrier between them and the shadow. Finally, after what seemed like forever, they reached Baba Choku's hut. The old priest was sitting outside, as if he had been expecting them. His wise eyes took in the scene, and he nodded slowly. Quickly, inside. Baba Choku ordered. The girls and Chidi rushed into the hut. Baba Choku followed them, closing the door behind him. The shadow reached the hut just as the door shut, but it couldn't enter. The old priest had placed powerful charms around his home, keeping the dark spirit at bay. The shadow screamed and battered against the door, but it was no use. Inside, the girls huddled together, terrified, while Chidi and Baba Choku prepared to face the dark spirit. We must act quickly, Baba Choku said. The shadow grows stronger with every passing moment. We need to perform a ritual to banish it forever. Chidi nodded. What do we need to do? Baba Choku began to gather herbs, candles, and a small drum from his shelves. The shadow was summoned by something or someone in the village. It has been feeding on the spirits of our young girls, turning them away from the light. We must find the source of its power and destroy it. But how do we find it? Amora asked, her voice trembling. Boba Choco looked at the girls. One of you holds the key to defeating the shadow. The spirit of darkness cannot survive in the presence of pure light. We must find the one among you who still holds onto that light and use it to banish the shadow. The girls exchanged frightened glances. None of them knew who it could be. But Chidi had a feeling. He looked at Neka, the youngest and most innocent of them all. She had always been the kindest, the one who never lost her way, even when the other girls started to change. Neka, Chidi said softly, I think it's you. Neka's eyes widened. Me? But I'm just a little girl. How can I defeat something so scary? Boba Choco smiled gently. It is often the smallest among us who have the greatest strength. You must believe in yourself, Neka. The light inside you is strong enough to banish the darkness. Neka took a deep breath and nodded. I'll try. I'll do whatever I can to save our village. Boba Choco handed Neka a small candle and lit it with a match. This candle represents your light, Neka. You must hold it close and focus on the goodness in your heart. When the shadow comes, do not be afraid. Your light will protect you. As Neka held the candle, it flickered brightly, casting a warm glow around the room. The shadow outside screamed in rage, sensing the light within. It battered against the walls of the hut, desperate to get inside. We must begin the ritual, Boba Choco said. He began to chant ancient words, his voice rising and falling like the wind. Chidi and the girls joined hands, forming a circle around Neka, who stood in the center with the candle. The shadow's attacks grew fiercer, but the light from the candle burned brighter, pushing the darkness back. Neka closed her eyes, focusing on the love she had for her family, her friends, and her village. She thought about all the good things in her life, letting the light in her heart shine as brightly as it could outside. The shadow shrieked in pain. The light was too strong for it to bear. It began to weaken, its dark form unraveling like smoke in the wind. Boba Choco's chanting grew louder, filling the hut with power. Suddenly, there was a burst of light, brighter than the sun, that filled the entire hut. The shadow let out one last, terrible scream before it was torn apart by the light, vanishing into nothingness, and then, all was quiet. The light from Neka's candle dimmed, leaving only the gentle glow of the fire in Boba Choco's heart. The shadow was gone, banished forever. The girls slowly opened their eyes, realizing that they were safe. Chidi let out a sigh of relief and smiled at Neka. You did it, Neka. You saved us all. Neka smiled shyly, her heart filled with warmth. Boba Choco placed a hand on her shoulder, proud of her bravery, but as the group celebrated their victory, Boba Choco's expression grew serious. The shadow may be gone, but the source of its power is still out there. We must find it and ensure it never returns to harm our village again. Chidi nodded. We'll find it, Boba Choco. We won't let the darkness come back. And so, with the shadow defeated but the mystery still unsolved, the group prepared for their next challenge. They knew that the battle against the darkness was far from over. The next morning, the sun rose over Yumidak village, bathing the land in a warm, golden light. The villagers had heard the distant sounds of the night's battle, and many were worried. As Chidi, Neka, Amora, and the other girls returned to the village with Boba Choco, they were met with anxious faces. Chief Obina hurried over, his eyes filled with concern. My daughter. Amora, are you all right? What happened? Amora hugged her father tightly. Papa, we are safe, but there's something we need to tell everyone. The villagers gathered around as Boba Choco began to explain what had happened. He spoke of the dark shadow that had tried to take over their daughters and how Neka's light had banished it. The villagers listened in stunned silence, their eyes wide with fear and amazement. When Boba Choco finished, Chief Obinna stepped forward. We are grateful that our daughters are safe, but Boba Choku is right. If the shadow came from somewhere, we must find out where and why. Chidi nodded in agreement. We believe the source of the shadow's power is still in the village. We need to find it before it causes more harm. The elders of the village, along with Boba Choku, decided to search for the source. They knew it could be anything, a cursed object, a dark spell, or even someone in the village who had unknowingly called the shadow. Boba Choku suggested they start by searching the old shrine in the forest where Chidi had first seen the shadow. The villagers agreed, and a group of the bravest men and women, including Chidi and the girls, prepared to go with Boba Choku to the shrine. Before they left, Neko approached Chidi. I'm scared, Chidi. What if the shadow comes back? Chidi knelt down to Neko's level and smiled kindly. You were brave last night, Neko, and your light is still with you. As long as you hold on to the good things in your heart, the darkness can't hurt you. Neko nodded, feeling a little braver. She took a deep breath and joined the others as they set out for the shrine. The journey through the forest was tense. The trees seemed to close in around them, and every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made the group jump. But they kept moving, determined to find the source of the evil that had threatened their village. When they finally reached the shrine, it was just as Chidi had described, dark, abandoned, and covered in vines. The air around the shrine was heavy and cold, even though the sun was shining brightly. Boba Choku instructed the group to spread out and search the area carefully. Look for anything unusual, he said. Anything that doesn't belong. The villagers began to comb through the shrine, looking for clues. Chidi and Neko stuck together, their eyes scanning the ground and the walls for any signs of the dark force. After a while, Amora called out, "Over here. I found something." The group hurried over to where Amora was standing. She was pointing at a small, carved stone buried in the ground near the entrance to the shrine. The stone was covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly with a dark, pulsing light. Boba Choku examined the stone closely. This is it, he said grimly. This stone is a powerful talisman, used to summon and control dark spirits. Someone must have placed it here long ago, and over time, it grew stronger, eventually summoning the shadow. But who would do such a thing? Chidi asked. Who would want to bring darkness to our village? Boba Choku shook his head. I do not know, but we must destroy this talisman before it can do any more harm. The villagers gathered around as Boba Choku prepared to destroy the stone. He pulled out a small bag of herbs and a vial of sacred oil. He sprinkled the herbs over the stone and poured the oil on top. Then, he began to chant, his voice low and powerful. As Boba Choku chanted, the symbols on the stone began to glow brighter, and the air around them grew colder. The ground trembled slightly, and a low, eerie hum filled the air. Suddenly, the stone cracked, and a dark mist began to seep out from the crack. The villagers gasped and took a step back, but Boba Choku continued chanting, his voice unwavering. The dark mist swirled around the stone, growing thicker and more menacing. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the mist began to dissolve into the air, and the stone shattered into tiny pieces. Boba Choku stopped chanting and looked up. The dark mist was gone, and the cold air had lifted. The talisman was destroyed. The villagers let out a sigh of relief. The source of the shadow's power was no more. But as they began to relax, Boba Choku's expression remained serious. There is still something we do not know, he said. We must find out who placed the talisman here and why. Until we do, the village is not truly safe. The villagers agreed, and they began to search the shrine for more clues. But even as they searched, a sense of unease lingered in the air. As the group left the shrine and began their journey back to the village, Chidi walked alongside Boba Choku. Boba, Chidi said quietly, do you think the darkness will return? Boba Choku sighed and looked up at the sky. The darkness is always there, Chidi, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But as long as there are those who carry the light in their hearts, the darkness can never win. Chidi nodded, understanding the truth in Bobachoku's words. They had won the battle, but the war against darkness was never truly over, and so, as the sun set on Umudike, the villagers prepared for whatever challenges might come next, knowing that they would face them together, with courage and with light in their hearts. As the villagers of Umudike returned home, they hoped that the worst was behind them. But in the days that followed, a new mystery began to unfold. Despite the destruction of the talisman, some of the girls still felt uneasy, as if a shadow lingered in their hearts. It was as though the darkness had left a mark that couldn't be easily erased. One night, as Neka was lying in bed, she heard a faint whisper. She sat up and looked around, but her room was empty. The whisper came again, this time a little louder. It seemed to be calling her name. Neka. Neka, terrified, Neka ran to her parents' room and woke them up. Mama, Papa, I heard something. Someone is calling me. Her parents tried to comfort her, saying it was just a bad dream. But Neka knew it was more than that. The next morning, she told Chidi and Bobachoku about the voice. Bobachoku's face grew serious as he listened. The darkness may have been weakened, but it is not gone. It is trying to find a way back into our world. We must be vigilant. Chidi agreed. We need to figure out where the voice is coming from and why it's calling Neka. Maybe it's connected to whoever placed the talisman in the shrine. That night, Bobachoku prepared a special potion for Neka to drink. This will help you enter a dream state where you can confront the darkness and find out what it wants, he explained. But remember, Neka, you are not alone. Your light will guide you. Neka was nervous, but she trusted Bobachoku. She drank the potion and soon fell into a deep sleep. In her dream, she found herself standing in the forest, but it was different this time. The trees were twisted and dark, and the sky above was a deep, angry red dot. As Neka walked through the forest, the whispering voice grew louder. Neka, come closer, find me. She followed the voice until she reached a clearing where an ancient tree stood. Its roots were thick and gnarled, and its branches stretched out like dark claws. At the base of the tree, Neka saw a small figure huddled in the shadows. As she approached, the figure slowly lifted its head, revealing the face of a young girl about Neka's age. But this girl's eyes were empty, and her skin was pale, almost ghostly. Who are you? Neka asked, her voice trembling. The girl smiled sadly. I am the spirit of the first daughter of Umudike. Long ago, I was sacrificed to the darkness by my own people to bring rain during a terrible drought. My spirit was bound to the talisman you destroyed, and now I am free, but I am also lost. Neka felt a pang of sadness for the girl. You don't have to be lost. I can help you find peace. The spirit shook her head. It's too late for me. The darkness has claimed my soul. But you can save the others. The darkness still hungers, and it will not stop until it has claimed another. Neka's heart raced. What can I do? The spirit pointed to the ancient tree. The darkness is rooted here, in this tree. You must burn it down to cleanse the land. But be warned, the darkness will fight back. Neka knew what she had to do. She reached into her pocket and found the small candle Bobachoku had given her. She lit it, and the tiny flame flickered briefly in the dark forest. As Neka approached the tree, the ground beneath her began to tremble. The branches of the tree lashed out, trying to snuff out the light. But Neka held her ground, remembering Bobachoku's words. She focused on the love she had for her village, her family, and her friends, letting the light in her heart grow stronger. The tree screamed as the flame touched its roots. The darkness within it writhed and shrieked, but it couldn't withstand the purity of Neka's light. The tree began to burn, and the flames spread quickly, consuming the twisted branches and dark roots. As the tree burned, the spirit of the first daughter smiled at Neka. Thank you, she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. You have saved us all." With those words, the spirit faded away, leaving Neka standing alone in the clearing. The sky above her turned from red to blue, and the twisted forest transformed back into the peaceful woods she knew. Neka woke up with a start, back in her own bed. The first light of dawn was breaking through her window. She ran outside and found Baba Choku and Chidi waiting for her. "I did it," she said breathlessly. "I found the source of the darkness and burned it down. The spirit of the first daughter is free." Baba Choku smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "You have done a great thing, Neka. The darkness is truly gone, and the village is safe." Chidi patted Neka on the back. "You're a hero, Neka. We couldn't have done it without you." As the sun rose over Umidike, the village celebrated its newfound peace. The girls who had been affected by the darkness slowly began to return to their old selves, their spirits no longer burdened by the shadow. Neka became known as the girl who saved the village, and her bravery was celebrated in stories for generations to come. And though the darkness had been defeated, Neka never forgot the lesson she had learned, that the light within us is the strongest force of all, capable of overcoming even the deepest shadows. From that day on, the villagers of Umidike lived in harmony, always mindful of the power of light and love to keep the darkness at bay. And Neka grew up to be a wise and kind woman, always ready to protect her village from any harm that might come their way. And so, the story of Umidike ended in peace and joy, with the village bathed in the warm light of a new dawn.